The sand gave way under Emma Carter's boots, and suddenly she was sliding. The slope looked gentle from the Jeep, but up close, it was a narrow chute of loose dust and sharp stones, hot as a stove. She grabbed for anything, rock, grass, air, but there was nothing to stop her. She hit the bottom hard, pain jarring up her spine as her shoulders slammed against a sun-baked boulder. For a moment, the world went white with heat and shock. Then she heard the growl. It wasn't loud, not the roaring movie trailer sound people imagine when they think lion. It was low, ragged, chewed up by dehydration and pain, but it vibrated straight through her bones, as real and solid as the rock at her back. Emma forced her eyes up and saw her. The lioness was closer than she should have been. 10 yards, maybe less. Mara. Emma had seen thousands of tracking dots on screens, watched lions and elephants and buffalo as little blinking signals moving through the Kambala Wildlife Corridor. But a dot on a monitor doesn't look like this, like a body carved down to the edges of survival. Mara's ribs stood out beneath her dull coat, every breath a shudder. Saliva and dust crusted her muzzle. Her eyes, once a clear amber on the Ranger files, were bloodshot and wild. And still, somehow, the lioness found enough strength to rise. Emma saw the muscles gather, tremble, bunch. Mara's paws dug into the sand. Her claws slid out of their sheaths, curved like polished ivory sickles. One step, then another. Behind her, tucked into the thin scrap of shade under a tilted slab of rock, 3 tiny shapes squirmed and cried. Cubs, no more than a few weeks old, mewling in thin, broken sounds that barely rose above the heat shimmer. Emma's body reacted before her mind could. She tried to push herself up, but her left leg skidded on the loose gravel. The rock at her back kept her pinned, half sitting, half lying, like an offering left in the sun. Her radio was still clipped to the Jeep's dash, 20 feet above. The tranquilizer rifle was in the hands of Dr. Miguel Reyes, somewhere up on the ridge. From down here, she couldn't see him. Couldn't see the Jeep. Couldn't see anything except the lioness and the bright, uncaring sky. Mara's jays locked on her. It was not the smooth, dispassionate look of a well-fed predator. It was something raw. There was pain in it, confusion, and underneath all of that, the same ancient calculation that has lived in every hunted and hunting creature since the beginning. Threat or not, kill or not. 3 seconds, Emma thought. That's all we've got. She could hear the cubs now more clearly, their cries thin and frantic. One of them tried to crawl toward its mother and barely made it a few inches before collapsing again in the dust. Out beyond the rocks, something else moved. Shapes in the wavering air. A harsh, ugly laugh floated in. Hyenas, circling just far enough to let others do the fighting first. The lioness shifted just a little, and Emma saw it. The way Mara put herself between Emma and the cubs even as she approached, protecting on both fronts. It made no sense. Nothing about this made sense. A dying lioness should conserve every bit of strength, save it for the scavengers. Instead, this one was spending what was left of her life standing over 3 helpless bundles of fur and facing down a human pinned against a rock. Emma's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her throat, thick and hot. She'd made hard choices before, signing the medical forms that said, "Do not intervene," watching animals fail under the weight of a drought or a broken leg, as if she was just signing a mortgage refinancer, picking between health insurance policies and car insurance policies. Paper decisions, made in air-conditioned offices, that carried life or death out here. But this was different. There were no forms, no committees, no credit card to swipe, no debt consolidation plan to ease the cost later. Just sand, heat,
a lioness, 3 cubs, and the fact that if Mara chose wrong, someone would die in front of them all. "Easy," Emma whispered, though she knew the lioness couldn't understand English. Her voice came out hoarse, dust scraping her throat. "Easy, girl. I'm not here for them." Mara took another step. The distance between them shrank to almost nothing. She could smell her now, blood, old sweat, the sour tang of a body overheating. Her lips peeled back, flashing teeth still clean and white despite the decay everywhere else. Somewhere up on the ridge, a metal click echoed faintly. Miguel was ready. If Mara lunged, he would have maybe one clean shot. If the dart hit wrong, if the dose was off, if panic made her jerk at the last second, Emma forced her mind away from that. Growing older teaches you that fear rarely changes what happens next. It just steals the breath you might have used to pray. 3 seconds, Emma thought again, but this time the words felt like a narration spoken for someone else. For the people who might someday watch this on a screen at home, maybe with the evening news still humming in the background, maybe while they're sorting mail and wondering about bills and retirement plans. People who tune into stories, not for the noise, but for the quiet truth inside them. If that ever happens, she hoped the voice that told the story would be gentle with Mara, gentle with her. Somewhere, in that imagined future, a narrator might say, "If moments like this touch something in you, if you believe that even out here, trust and grace still matter, you might like to stay with us on Whispering Hearts. You don't have to do anything now, but when you're ready, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens after these 3 seconds." But right now, there was no narrator, just hot air, circling hyenas, and a dying lioness with a choice to make. Mara's paw came up, slow and shaking, claws still fully extended. Her chest hitched with a breath that sounded almost like a cough. The cubs cried again, weaker now. The shadows of the hyenas crept closer, long and eager along the ground. Emma didn't close her eyes. If this was it, she wanted to see the mother who killed her, wanted to see whether, in that last instant, there was anything in Mara's face besides hunger and fear. She held the lioness's gaze, her own hands open on the sand, palms up, empty. 3 heartbeats. 1. Mara's paw hovered, frozen in the air between them. 2. The closest hyena broke from the edge of the heat shimmer, slinking toward the cubs, yellow eyes fixed on the smallest one. 3. The lioness moved. Long before Emma Carter found herself pinned against the sun-baked rock with a dying lioness choosing whether to kill her, the world around Kambala Wildlife Corridor had already begun to unravel. 3 days earlier, at 9:12 a.m., she was standing inside the reserve's monitoring room, staring at a glowing map dotted with pulsing GPS signals: elephants, wild dogs, leopards, hyenas, and one lioness, Mara. Her signal blinked the same way every minute, but something was wrong. It hadn't moved, not an inch, not in 2 full days. Emma leaned closer to the monitor, zooming in until the screen was nearly all 1 pixel of static yellow grassland. Mara had an established range. She was a young mother, careful, always moving between the same 4 shade clusters to keep her cubs hidden. A lioness sits still when she's nursing or when she's guarding a kill, but never for 48 straight hours. Not in this heat, not in this drought. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. "You see it too?" Emma didn't need to turn around to recognize the voice. Liam Park, the newest technician on the team, hovered behind her with a tablet under one arm and a coffee he forgot to drink still steaming in his hand. Barely 24, bright, jumpy, always triple-checking his data. The kind of kid who grew up watching nature documentaries on YouTube, then suddenly found himself standing in the real thing. Emma nodded.
She hasn't moved. Liam shifted forward and tapped a log on the side screen. Temperature in that sector hit 110 yesterday. There was a brush fire 2 miles west, and he swiped again, showing a cluster of heat signatures recorded overnight. Hyenas, a lot of them. They were circling that area from 2 to 4 a.m. Emma's jaw tightened. Hyenas weren't scavengers in the way tourists imagined them. They were opportunists, smart, organized, patient. A starving lioness with newborn cubs was more opportunity than threat. She kept her eyes on the blinking dot. Did she send any movement pings at all? No. Heart rate sensor shows spikes though, slow ones, like she was struggling. Struggling. It was a clinical word, but there was nothing clinical about the image it conjured. An animal alone in blistering heat, pushing through pain no one would see. Emma straightened, rubbing the back of her neck. The monitoring room felt smaller than usual, the air thick with dust from last night's wind. The drought had stretched on for months now, baking the land into a brittle shell. Emma had spent most of that time out in the field, checking water tanks, clearing old wells, documenting the carcasses of animals that never made it to shade in time. She had seen hyenas tearing at a kudu so dehydrated it didn't have the strength to run. She had watched vultures descend on a zebra before the body had even finished falling. Nature was always honest, but drought made it brutal. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Emma, could it be her collar malfunctioning? She shook her head. No, the battery's new, and the heart rate sensor doesn't freeze when the location does. He swallowed. So she's either injured or she's already... Don't say it. Emma cut in softly. Not yet, until we know. She zoomed out and looked at the broader terrain. A cracked stretch of Kambala, rimmed with red earth, sparse brush, a few lonely acacia trees with branches curled upward like begging hands. If Mara was there, if she was still alive, she wouldn't last long. Not without water. Not with cubs. A cub's first weeks were all hunger, sleep, and fear. A mother's first weeks were all vigilance. Emma had seen lionesses fight through injuries bad enough to cripple anything else simply because they had something to protect. But even the strongest instincts break when hunger and heat push too far. A door slammed in the hallway. The sound echoed through the monitoring room, snapping Liam out of his silence. He cleared his throat. I should alert Dr. Reyes. He said to notify him if any predator goes motionless more than 24 hours. Emma lifted her hand slightly. No, not yet. Let me look at the ground logs first. Liam blinked. You think the system's wrong? I think systems don't tell the whole story. She exhaled slowly. Show me the last satellite pass. He tapped the keyed command. The screen refreshed, pulling up a hazy overhead shot. Ash streaks from the old fire. A faint trail of disturbed earth, drag marks, fallen branches, hard to tell. And then just barely the shadow of a rock outcrop. Enough shade for a den, but also enough to trap an animal if something collapsed. Liam leaned in. You think she's stuck? Emma didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because she wasn't thinking about the map anymore. She was thinking about another animal, another map, another blinking dot years ago in Arizona. A coyote mother whose movements had slowed in the days before she died, surrounded by pups too young to understand what was happening. Back then, Emma had followed the rules. Back then, she had watched from a distance, powerless. Back then, she had learned the hardest truth. Sometimes, doing nothing is worse than doing the wrong thing. She pushed away from the desk. I'm going. Liam's eyes widened. Alone? The protocol. I'll radio Miguel when I confirm what's happening. Right now, what I need is to see the ground for myself. He hesitated just long enough to make her pause. Be careful, Emma. If it really is Mara, she's got cubs. A mother like that won't hesitate. I know. And she did. But she also knew something else. A mother who can't move is a mother who's already losing. She grabbed her field pack, checked her water, and stepped outside. The heat hit her like a heavy,
open oven door. The kind of heat older rangers always warned the new ones about, the kind that turns minutes into risks. As she climbed into the Jeep, Liam stood at the doorway, tablet pressed to his chest. "Emma," he called, just as she started the engine. She met his eyes. "If you find her, don't wait for backup." It wasn't protocol. It wasn't safe. But it was the truth. Emma nodded once, the dust swirling up around the wheels as she pulled out of camp into the vast, shimmering emptiness. 3 days later, on that same stretch of land, she'd be pinned against a rock with a dying lioness hovering above her. But on this morning, all she had was a blinking dot on a screen and a feeling deep in her chest that something terrible had already begun.
The road out of camp stretched like a cracked ribbon beneath the morning sun, its edges curling under the heat. Emma kept both hands steady on the wheel as the Jeep rattled over old tracks, but her mind wasn't on the road. It hadn't been for a long time, not since Arizona. Not since the night she still replayed when sleep grew thin and the past grew loud. She hadn't meant to remember it today, but Mara's frozen GPS dot and the echo of Liam's worried voice cracked something open. Memories slipped through like water under a door, quiet at first, then relentless. It had been 4 years ago. Emma was working her last season at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center outside Tucson. A call came in about an injured coyote mother seen dragging one leg near a dried wash. Regulations were clear: observe, assess, but do not interfere unless the injury was human-caused. Arizona's wildlife policy treated natural harm as nature's business. Emma followed protocol. She hiked out before dawn, tracking the mother through brush and brittle mesquite trees. When she finally found her, the coyote was lying beside her den. 3 pups, no bigger than mittens, were pressed against her ribs, crying from hunger. The mother lifted her head when Emma approached, exhaustion clouding her eyes, but she didn't run, didn't snarl, didn't even try. She was too weak. The memory tightened inside Emma like a knot. She remembered the heat that day, thick, suffocating, the kind that tastes like burning rubber on your tongue. She remembered radioing her supervisor, hearing the calm reply that protocol required no intervention. If she's injured by natural causes, we document and let the ecosystem balance itself. She remembered sitting 15 feet away for nearly 2 hours, watching the pups try to nurse from a mother whose body was already shutting down. And she remembered the moment the coyote's breathing slowed, then stopped altogether. Emma had pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from making a sound. Regulations said not to disturb the den. Regulations said the pups would likely be taken by owls or foxes. Regulations said it wasn't her place to save them. But she remembered each tiny whimper as the pups nosed at their mother, confused, then curled together in the dust when no warmth answered them back. She remembered walking away, the supervisor praising her for professional composure, the word ringing in her ears like an insult. She remembered how cold the world felt that night, and how she promised herself, silently, fiercely, that if she ever had the chance again, if she ever faced another mother struggling through her last breaths with helpless babies at her side, she would not stand there doing nothing. The Jeep jolted as a rut in the dirt caught the front tire, pulling Emma sharply back to the present. The sun was higher now, bleaching the sky to a hard white. The wind carried a fine, stinging grit that coated her lips. A pair of vultures circled far ahead, their wings carving lazy arcs. Not a good sign. She slowed as she approached the first ridge overlooking the southern sector. From here, she could see across miles of thirsty grass and fractured earth. It looked almost lunar, shadows in the wrong places, colors leached away by heat. Somewhere out there, Mara was lying still, or trapped, or... No, Emma pushed that thought away before it could form. The radio crackled behind her seat. She reached back, adjusted the frequency. A burst of static, then a faint voice. Liam. Emma? I know you're out of range soon. Just call if you see anything. His voice was thin, anxious but earnest. It reminded her how young he was, young enough to believe there was always more time, young enough to believe rules were written by people who had watched nature long enough to understand it. She envied that once. "Copy," she answered. "I'll check in when I'm closer." A dust devil spun across the road ahead, kicking sand high into the air. Emma eased around it, her jaw tightening. The desert was talking today, and she'd learned long ago to listen. The wind felt wrong, restless, as if the land itself was holding its breath. She knew that feeling too well, the sense that something was dying just beyond sight. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. She wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. She wouldn't stand 15 feet away this time. She wouldn't wait for someone to tell her what nature intended. She wouldn't let cubs starve because a rule book said, "Observe only." Not again. As the Jeep climbed the next rise, the signal monitor blinked. Mara's location unchanged. Not a single shift in coordinates. Emma exhaled, a slow, steady breath that held both dread and determination. "Hold on, girl," she murmured to the empty seat beside her. "I'm coming." And somewhere far ahead, beyond the heat waves and the vultures, a lioness lay in the dust, weak but still alive, still fighting for 3 tiny cubs whose cries would soon echo inside Emma's memory the same way those coyote pups once had. Only this time, she wasn't planning to walk away.
The sun had barely set when the first strange sound reached the monitoring station, low, uneven, carried on the kind of desert wind that slips through cracks and makes old doors tremble. Emma Carter wasn't supposed to be awake. She'd been on the road since sunrise, checking dry wells and logging carcass reports, then spent the last hours in the garage repairing a cracked coolant hose on the Jeep. Her shoulders ached and her eyes felt lined with dust, but something in that distant noise pulled her upright like a hand gripping her collar. It came again, longer this time, rough-edged, like a growl dragged across broken glass. She stepped out of the workshop doorway, letting the night air wrap around her. Nights in Kambala carried a different kind of heat, still hot, but with a breath of coolness drifting under it, the same way a cooling rack softens the edge of a too-warm pie. Stars glinted like needles. The blocky silhouettes of storage sheds sat quiet under the moon. Then the sound rose a third time. Emma froze. Not a territorial roar, not a hunting call. It sounded wrong. Behind her, the door creaked open. Liam appeared, wearing the same cargo pants he'd worn all day and an oversized jacket he probably borrowed from Lost and Found. His hair was a mess, sticking up in directions that made him look half electrocuted, but his face was serious. "You heard it too?" Emma nodded. "Where's it coming from?" Liam held up his tablet. "I boosted the directional mic range." He pointed toward the southern sector, the same direction Mara's GPS dot had been frozen since yesterday. Sound traveled from that corridor. And Emma? It's not normal. She didn't need convincing. The noise stirred something deep in her memory, an old instinct, the same one she'd felt in Arizona when the coyote mother cried her last cries. There's a tone animals make when they're beyond fear and deep into pain. A tone no human forgets once they've heard it. "It's a distress call," Emma murmured. "But not just pain. There's strain in it, like she's trying to move and can't." Could it be Mara? Emma didn't answer out loud, but her silence was enough. The two of them walked quickly to the sound analysis console inside the small communications room. The metal table was cool under Emma's fingers as she leaned in. Liam tapped the screen, isolating frequencies, filtering wind and insect buzz. The waveform pulsed irregularly, too slow for a hyena, too rough for a leopard, too deep for a cub. Then it happened again, closer this time, in the playback, an elongated broken bellow that thinned into a rasp near the end. Emma closed her eyes for a moment. She could see it already, an animal stuck, dehydrated, disoriented,
refusing to leave her cubs even as the strength drained out of her body. A mother making noise not for help, because wild mothers don't call for help, but out of desperation, as instinct and exhaustion collided. "It's her," Emma whispered, opening her eyes. "So, do we wake Miguel now?" Emma looked through the window toward the dim lights of the staff quarters. She imagined Miguel pulling on his boots, his tired eyes narrowing at the mention of interference. He'd want a full team. He'd want daylight. He'd want certainty. They had none of that. And Mara did not have time. Emma's jaw flexed. If we call Miguel now, he'll delay until morning. He'll say moving at night is too dangerous. "He's not wrong," Liam said quietly. "Hyenas hunt more aggressively after dark, and lions—" "I know. But you still want to go." It wasn't a question. Emma glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:43 p.m. The heat earlier was finally easing, lifting just enough that predators would be on the move. She pictured Mara lying somewhere under a tilted slab of rock, ribs heaving, cubs crying for milk that wouldn't come. If the cry they'd just heard was any proof, Mara wasn't quietly dying. She was fighting. And fights make noise. Noise attract scavengers. "No waiting," Emma said softly. "I need to see the ground now." Liam swallowed hard. "Emma, going alone at night is... I won't go all the way." She grabbed her keys from the wall hook. "I'll get close enough to confirm whether she moved. If she's still static, I'll call Miguel. And if she's alive but trapped?" Emma paused at the threshold. Her shadow stretched long across the dirt floor. "Then I'll do what I can until sunrise." He worked his jaw, debating something silently, then hurried to catch up. "At least take this." He pressed a small device into her palm, a chest-pin camera barely bigger than a matchbox. "It uploads automatically to the archive in case." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Emma clipped it to her vest. The device blinked red, then went still. The cry echoed a fourth time, fainter now, like a flame losing fuel. Emma stepped out into the night, the starlight sharp on her face. The Jeep waited with its hood cooling, ticking like an old clock. She opened the door, slid in, and started the engine. Liam leaned against the doorway behind her. "If you find her, don't make the same mistake they made with that coyote." Emma's hands tightened around the wheel. The memory stabbed deep, but this time the pain steadied her instead of weakening her. "I won't." The Jeep rolled into the darkness, its headlights carving a narrow path through the desert. Behind her, the night swallowed the last echoes of Mara's broken cry, leaving Emma alone with the thrum of the engine, the hum of the tires, and a single thought beating under her ribs. If Mara was still fighting, then Emma would fight too, even if it meant breaking every rule that had once chained her hands.
The first miles passed under the Jeep in a blur of dust and darkness. Emma kept the headlights low, not out of stealth so much as respect. Out here, bright light could blind more than it helped. The beams caught the white of termite mounds, the pale ribs of old fences, the occasional glint of animal eyes before they turned away into the scrub. The monitoring station fell behind her like a small island of yellow light. Ahead, the land unfolded in layers of shadow. The sky was crowded with stars, sharp and cold, like someone had scattered ground glass across black velvet. If you didn't know better, you could almost forget how harsh the ground beneath them had become. She didn't forget. The drought had left its mark on everything. Grass that should have reached a man's hip was shaved down to brittle stubble. Trees that had shaded elephants for generations now stood like skeletons, their bark split and peeling. Once, Kambala had looked like the nature documentaries she'd watched as a kid, golden, generous, alive. Tonight, it looked like the future those documentaries tried not to show.
A chorus of insects rose and fell as she drove. Now and then a nightjar burst up from the road, its wings flashing pale in the headlights before it vanished into the dark. The radio hissed quietly on the seat beside her, tuned to Miguel's frequency, though she hadn't called him yet. Part of her knew she should. Another part, the part that still heard that coyote's pups, wanted a few minutes more where the decision was only hers. She followed the GPS display clipped to the dash, the small arrow inching closer to the coordinates she already knew by heart. Mara's last ping lay ahead and slightly south, near a shallow basin and a series of low rock outcrops. It was the sort of place lions chose for dens, shelter from the wind, good sight lines, a bit of shade when the sun climbed high, assuming the rock hadn't become a trap. As she dropped into a dry riverbed and climbed the far bank, the Jeep's rear end fishtailed slightly. The ground here was worse than she remembered, cracked not just on the surface but deep, as if the earth had been baked and then twisted. She eased off the gas, letting the tires find their grip. Half-mile later, the first warning came. A faint line appeared in the beam of the headlights, running at a diagonal across the track. At first, Emma thought it was just another shallow rut. Then the Jeep bumped over the near edge and dipped so sharply her teeth clicked together. Instinctively, she hit the brakes. The front wheel stopped inches from the far side. Her stomach dropped. The line was a fissure, narrow where it met the surface, widening into darkness beneath. When she leaned forward and looked down through the windshield, she couldn't see the bottom. Emma let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A little more speed, a little less luck, and the front axle might have snapped, sending her nose first into a crack no one would find until morning. Easy, she murmured, to herself this time. One thing at a time. She backed up, turned the wheel hard, and picked her way along the edge until she found a narrower place to cross. The Jeep bumped through with a groan and a scrape that made her wince, but it held. Past the fissure, the land opened into what had once been a shallow pan. In a wet year, water would have pooled here, drawing zebras and wildebeest, painting the air with birdsong. Now, it was a bowl of hard-packed clay and scattered bones. A springbok skull lay on its side, horn tips pointing at the sky. A set of elephant tracks led in and never let out. Emma slowed almost to a crawl. It wasn't morbid curiosity that made her look. It was context. Every carcass, every track, every feather left behind told a story. And tonight, she needed to understand the story of this place before she drove straight into its ending. On the far lip of the pan, she stopped altogether, killed the engine, let silence settle around her like a blanket. For a few seconds, there was only the ticking of cooling metal and the soft crackle of the radio. Then from far off came the sound she'd hoped not to hear, and yet had expected all along. Vultures. Not the soft wing beats themselves, but the croaking calls they made as they jostled for position in the dark. It was coming from the general direction of Mara's last location, a broken chorus riding the air. Emma closed her eyes just for a heartbeat. Vultures didn't always mean a fresh kill. Sometimes they were just scouting, waiting, but they rarely circled for no reason. She started the engine again, feeling the weight of time settle heavier on her shoulders. The GPS arrow was creeping closer to the small circle she'd marked in her mind. Another mile, maybe less. Beyond the next ridge, she'd get her first real look at the southern basin. As the Jeep climbed, the angle of the headlights changed, turning the nearest rocks into looming shapes. The path narrowed, hemmed in by scrub on one side and a steep drop on the other. She eased her foot, letting the vehicle climb in low gear, listening for anything out of place, a snarl, a bark, the hyena's ugly laugh. Nothing yet. just the whisper of the tires and the low hum of the engine. At the top, she stopped again, put the Jeep in park, turned off the lights. The night rushed in. For a moment, she let her eyes adjust. The basin spread out below like a dark bowl, its edges silvered by moonlight. There, on the far side, tucked against a scatter of rock, she saw it. A shape that didn't belong to stone or brush. Too smooth, too rounded, the faintest glint of metal near it, catching the moon. A tracking collar. Emma's throat tightened. Mara hadn't moved far at all. She reached for the radio, thumb hovering over the transmit button. She knew that once she called Miguel, protocol would flood back into the picture. Sedation charts, risk assessments, the careful language of conservation policy and liability. There were reasons for all of it, good reasons. But down there, in that patch of borrowed shadow, a lioness lay on the thin edge between life and death, and 3 cubs, if they were still alive, lay on an edge even thinner. Emma lowered the radio without pressing the button. First the ground, she told herself, then the rules. She put the Jeep in gear and began her careful descent into the basin, towards the place where 3 nights from now she would find herself pinned against a rock with a dying lioness racing towards her and 3 seconds left to decide whether to trust the choice of a predator's heart.
Emma eased the Jeep down the last stretch of the basin, the tires rolling slow and cautious over the uneven earth. Each foot forward felt heavier than the one before it. Her pulse kept time with the engine's soft growl, steady but too fast, as if her body already sensed the truth waiting in the dark ahead. The rock formation rose gradually from the ground, like the spine of some ancient creature, tilted and cracked from seasons of heat. A slanted slab created a thin strip of shade, barely enough for a lioness to shelter under, let alone raise her newborns. But in drought, even the smallest shadow could mean survival. Emma stopped 30 yards away, turned off the engine, let the night settle. At first, she saw nothing. The landscape looked still, silent, as if emptied by the drought. Only when she stepped out of the Jeep and the dust shifted beneath her boots did the reality begin to take shape. A dark shape lay against the base of the rock, its outline too limp, too still. Mara. Emma moved slowly, remembering every cautionary lecture she'd ever given interns. Never assume a lion is dead. Never assume she can't move. But the closer she got, the more her stomach tightened. The lioness's ribs stood out sharply under her dull fur. Her flanks trembled with shallow breaths that sounded more like gasps than any rhythm of life. The moonlight caught on something metallic near her neck, the tracking collar. It hadn't shifted at all. Emma crouched, keeping her body angled sideways, non-threatening. She studied the scene with the calm of someone trained to process details under pressure. Mara wasn't just exhausted, she was pinned. A thick branch, maybe from an acacia tree from the ridge above, had fallen at an angle during the brush fire days before. It lay across her lower body, not crushing, but trapping, wedged between the rock and Mara's hip. She could see the scrape marks where the lioness had tried to drag herself free. The soil was torn with claw marks. The marks grew weaker the closer they got to where she now lay. She'd fought until she couldn't fight anymore. Her throat tightened. Then came the sound that truly broke her. Soft, pitiful, and unmistakably alive. A cub's mewl. She leaned forward slightly, searching the shadows. There, pressed against Mara's belly, were 2 cubs. Tiny, barely bigger than house cats. Their fur, normally a soft golden fuzz, was caked with dust. Their bellies were sunken, their cries thin and ragged. One tried to nuzzle at Mara's chest, but found nothing, no milk, no warmth,
only skin drawn tight against bone. A third cub lay a few feet from the others, motionless except for the faintest twitch of its ear. Her breath caught. She knelt carefully, keeping her movements slow, gentle, as though the air itself could harm the fragile thing. The cub was alive, but just barely. Emma reached out and hovered her hand over its tiny form, feeling the heat of the ground radiating upward. The cub's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow bursts. Dehydration, starvation, exhaustion, all of it layered on too small a body. She swallowed hard. Behind her, a dry rustle scraped across the stone. She froze. Mara's head lifted, barely an inch, but enough for Emma to see the gleam of her eye. Fever-bright, pain-filled, but aware. The lioness was not unconscious, not gone. She was trapped and dying, but her instincts were very much alive. Emma didn't move. She let Mara see her, let her smell the air, let her process the shape of a human crouched near her cubs. "Easy, girl," Emma whispered, her voice soft but steady. "I'm not here to hurt them." Mara's muscles quivered. A low vibration trembled through her chest, not quite a growl, more like the weak shadow of one. She wasn't warning Emma away. She didn't have the strength, but she was trying. That meant there was still a mother inside this dying body. Emma slowly backed up 2 steps, not enough to retreat, but enough to show respect. Her eyes scanned the ground again, cataloging more details. A streak of dried blood, hyena tracks circling the area, feather scraps from vultures that had already been waiting. Mara had been defending these cubs for hours longer than her body should have allowed. Time wasn't running out. Time had run out hours ago. Everything from here was borrowed. Emma reached for her water canteen and uncapped it, letting the trickle fall softly onto the earth between them. The scent drifted, clean and sharp. Mara's ear twitched. Her nose lifted a fraction of an inch, struggling to catch the smell. The cubs smelled it too. One of them let out a weak, broken squeak and tried to crawl toward the moisture-darkened patch of dirt. It failed halfway there. Emma felt something tighten inside her chest. Something old, raw, and mercilessly familiar. This was Arizona. This was that coyote. This was the sound of helpless young crying for a mother who had nothing left to give. Only this time, Emma wasn't 15 feet away, obeying a rule that felt like betrayal. She was right here, close enough to feel the heat baking from the lioness's body, close enough to see the tremor in every breath. She whispered, mostly to herself, "Not again. Not this time." A faint breeze swept across the basin, carrying a smell Emma recognized instantly. Musky, sour, predatory. Hyenas. They were out there, several, watching, waiting for Mara to take her final breath so they could finish what hunger demanded. Emma looked at the cubs, then at the dying lioness. She didn't have hours. She didn't have protocol. She didn't even have a plan. But she had a decision. Before sunrise, she would have to choose whether to intervene, whether to fight for the life of a mother who might kill her on instinct, or leave the family to the fate nature had already written. And somewhere deep in the shadows behind her, the hyenas waffed. Not loudly, not yet, but enough to remind her that she wasn't the only one waiting to see whether Mara lived long enough to protect her cubs for even one more hour.
For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She stayed crouched beside the rock slab, feeling the heat radiate through her pants, listening to the shallow pull of Mara's breath. The cubs pressed close to their mother, too weak even to cry now. The air was thick with dust,
and the metallic scent of dehydration, sharp enough that Emma could taste it on the back of her tongue. The hyena's laughter echoed again across the basin, bouncing off stone in silence. They weren't close yet, but they were patient. Hyenas could wait longer than grief. Emma straightened slowly and stepped back toward the jeep. This situation was spiraling too fast for one person. She needed Dr. Reyes, she needed equipment, she needed someone with authority who could make the call she no longer trusted herself to make. Her hands shook as she lifted the radio. "Dr. Reyes, this is Carter. Do you copy?" Static, then a sleepy crackle. "Emma? It's nearly midnight. What's wrong?" She swallowed. "I found Mara." "Alive?" "Yes, but she's trapped. A fallen branch pinned her, severely dehydrated. And the cubs, Miguel, they're barely hanging on." His tone sharpened. "Emma, step back from the site immediately. Do not approach. I'm waking the full team. We'll come at dawn." Dawn. Emma closed her eyes. In 6 hours, the temperature would climb past 100. The cubs wouldn't last that long. Mara might not last 30 minutes. "Miguel, we don't have until dawn." "We do," he said firmly. "Protocol exists for a reason. You know this. A mother with cubs, especially a compromised mother, is the most dangerous animal in this reserve." Emma turned and looked at Mara again. The lioness was barely conscious. Her claw marks stretched like desperate handwriting in the dirt. Dangerous? Yes. Capable of killing her? Absolutely. But that wasn't the only truth. "Miguel, she's trying to move, trying to stay upright. She's still protecting them, even now." Emma exhaled. "She won't make it until morning." "Emma," his voice tightened. That tone he used when talking to rangers who let their hearts lead too far. "If we intervene now, in the dark, without backup, without sedation, someone dies, and it won't be the lion." Emma gripped the radio harder. Her knuckles whitened. "Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to keep them alive right now." "What you do," Miguel replied, "is follow protocol. Secure the perimeter, keep hyenas away, and wait for the team." Wait. Wait while 3 cubs gasped for air. Wait while a mother dragged her breaths through a throat so dry it crackled. Wait while the hyenas closed in. Emma looked around at the basin, the rocks, the shadows, the footprints circling the den. She remembered the coyote pups in Arizona, how she had waited because someone told her waiting was the right thing, how she had watched them fade while the desert sunrise painted the sky beautiful, how that beauty had looked like cruelty. Emma lowered the radio to her chest. "Copy," she said, but she didn't move toward the jeep. Not yet. The wind shifted and the smell of the hyenas grew stronger. They were closer now. She could hear their paws brushing the brittle grass. Their laughter came again, higher this time, almost excited. Mara heard it too. A tremor ran through her body, a ghost of her old strength. Her paw lifted an inch, then fell uselessly. She tried again, failed. Emma watched the lioness struggle, watched her push against the branch, though her muscles quivered with exhaustion. Watched the way her gaze drifted toward her cubs, then toward the darkness beyond them, as if she knew death was circling, and she didn't have the strength left to fight. Emma's throat tightened. She stepped forward before her mind could stop her. Not much, just a few feet, just enough that Mara could see her clearly. The lioness stirred. Her head lifted an inch, her tongue dragged across her cracked lips, trying to catch moisture that wasn't there. Her breath rattled, but her gaze was steady, fixed on Emma, searching for threat. Emma sank to her knees deliberately, lowering herself until she was no bigger than a child in the lioness's eyes. She placed her hands flat on the dirt, palms open, vulnerable. "Hey," she whispered, her voice thin but calm. "I know you're scared. I know you want to protect them." Her ears twitched. A low rasp vibrated from her throat, a warning, but not a full growl yet. Emma kept her breathing slow. Not easy, not with the hyenas edging closer, their shapes beginning to form at the rim of the basin. The hyena's eyes glinted like dull coins. Mara's body stiffened, her breath caught. She forced her head up another inch, protecting her cubs with the only thing she still had left, her presence. Emma's heart pounded. She knew the moment she made the choice. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heroic. It was quiet, small, but absolute. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered. She didn't know if the lioness understood the words, but something in Mara's gaze softened, just slightly, just enough. 3 seconds. That's all a choice ever takes. And Emma Carter had just made hers.
The hyenas eased farther into the basin, their bodies weaving in that unsettling, predatory rhythm. Shoulders rolling forward, haunches shifting low, eyes fixed on the weakest point in the scene. They could smell death here. In drought, scent carried like a living thing, and tonight it carried the message they understood best: a mother slipping away, and cubs too small to fight back. Emma rose slowly to her feet, not tall, not threatening, but enough to make her silhouette larger. She didn't move toward the cubs, she didn't move toward Mara. She simply stood between the den entrance and the nearest hyena, her boots sinking slightly into the soft dust. The hyena paused, its ears pricked forward, testing her confidence. Emma kept her shoulders relaxed, though her heart thrashed like a trapped bird. She'd faced hyenas before, but never alone, never at night, never while trying to reassure a dying lioness that she wasn't a threat. "Not tonight," she whispered, barely audible even to herself. Behind her, Mara rasped in another breath, shallow, strained. The branch still pinned her hip at an angle that made Emma's stomach churn. One more strong push might break bone. One wrong move might crush a cub. The lioness knew this. Emma saw it in the way Mara no longer tried to free herself. Her energy now belonged to something else, keeping her cubs alive for a few minutes longer, long enough for chance or miracle. Emma crouched again, drawing a slow breath to steady her voice. "Mara," she whispered, "I need you to hold on, just a little longer. Don't waste your strength on me. Save it for them." The lioness blinked, slow, deliberate. That exhausted gesture hit Emma harder than any roar could have. Mara wasn't just aware of her presence, she was assessing it. The closest hyena crept forward another step, dust puffed under its paws. A second flanked to the right, muzzle low, nostrils flaring at the smell of cubs. Emma reached for the only tool she had, her voice. "Get back," she barked. Her shout cracked across the basin. The hyenas froze for a heartbeat, just long enough for her to grab a fist-sized rock and slam it onto the ground beside her. The sound echoed sharply. The nearest hyena flinched, startled by her sudden aggression. Not enough to scare them off, but enough to buy seconds. Seconds mattered. Emma knew the limits. Hyenas didn't fear humans the way many predators did, but they feared unpredictability, noise, movement, confident posture. For the moment, her voice and the rock were enough. The second hyena hissed a low, guttural growl. Its hackles rose, its eyes reflecting dull silver as it circled wider, testing, watching. Emma's gaze flicked to the jeep, 25 yards away, too far to run without provoking a chase, and even if she made it, she'd never return in time to save the cubs. Her radio crackled at her hip. Miguel's voice filtered through, clipped and sharp. "Emma, stay put and keep your distance. We're assembling the team. Do not engage. Do you copy?" She didn't answer. Her attention stayed on Mara. She took one careful step toward the lioness. Mara's ear twitched, tracking her. Emma lowered herself, palms open again, a silent promise. The cubs lay curled together now, breaths shallow,
bodies trembling with the effort of staying alive. The third cub, the smallest, the one that had crawled toward the spilled water, had collapsed again, its tiny sides barely moving. Emma felt her chest tighten until she could hardly breathe. She reached down and let a few drops of water fall from her fingertips onto her palm. Then she extended her hand toward the smallest cub, slow, deliberate, her posture low so Mara could see everything. "Let me help them," she whispered. Mara didn't snarl, didn't swipe. She couldn't. Her strength had drained down to the dregs of instinct. But her eyes, those fevered, exhausted eyes, never left Emma's hand. Behind them, another hyena padded forward. Emma glanced over her shoulder. 3 of them now, a 4th lingering near the ridge. Their patience was thinning. Their hunger wasn't. She needed to act. Not tomorrow, not at dawn, now. Emma reached for the fallen branch pinning Mara's hip. She gripped it with both hands and braced her feet in the dirt. "Okay, girl, don't fight me. Don't move. I'm going to try to lift this." She pulled. The branch shifted, barely an inch. Mara gasped at the pressure change, her claws digging lines in the dirt. Emma gritted her teeth and lifted harder. Her arms shook. Sweat stung her eyes. The branch refused to budge more than a few inches, but even that tiny movement changed Mara's posture. The cubs whimpered. The hyenas surged forward. Emma spun and shouted, raw, loud, desperate, "Back!" Her voice broke through the night like a crack of thunder. She grabbed another rock and hurled it at the nearest hyena. It struck the ground inches from its paws, scattering dust. The animal retreated a step, more irritated than frightened. Emma stepped forward, spreading her arms wide, making her silhouette larger. "Not tonight," she yelled again, her voice echoing across the basin. The hyenas hesitated, but only for a second. Mara tried to lift her head to defend her cubs again, but her strength gave out. Her skull hit the ground with a dull thud. Emma's chest tightened with urgency, almost panic. They were running out of time. Mara, the cubs, even her. She backed toward the lioness again, positioning herself between the predators and the den. One hyena lunged a little closer, impatient now. Emma planted her boots and raised her voice one last time. "You want them." She grabbed the closest rock, lifted it over her head. "You go through me." The basin held its breath. The hyenas froze again, caught off guard by her defiance, her posture, her refusal to break. And in that fragile sliver of silence, something shifted behind her. Not a growl, not a cry. A breath. A faint, trembling breath from Mara, a sound of will returning where life had been slipping. Emma dared not look back, but she felt it. The lioness wasn't done yet, and neither was she.
For a few long minutes, nothing moved. Emma stood with her feet planted in the dust, a rock in one hand, her arms spread just enough to make herself look bigger. The hyenas watched her, heads low, ears twitching, weighing the strange picture of a lone human standing between them and a dying lioness. A breeze rolled through the basin, carrying her scent to them and the lions, and the thin, milky smell of cubs. Hunger won over caution. The closest hyena crept forward again, muscles sliding under its spotted hide, lips peeling back to show blunt, crushing teeth. "Easy," Emma murmured, more to herself than to anything else. Behind her, she heard Miguel pull in another ragged breath. The sound was weaker now, the end of it rattling in her chest. The cubs huddled tighter against their mother's flank, too spent even to whimper. Then, faint and far, the night shifted. A low, distant hum drifted over the ridge. Tires on hard ground. An engine. The hyenas heard it too. Their heads snapped up in unison, ears pricked to the western edge of the basin. Lights flashed briefly between the rocks up above.
headlamps cutting through the darkness like twin stars. The nearest hyena snarled, frustrated, and slunk backward into shadow. The others followed, circling away, not gone, but retreating to the rim. They were hunters, but they weren't fools. A vehicle meant people. People meant noise and metal and fire. Emma's shoulders sagged with relief. Her knees felt suddenly weak. She stayed where she was until the Jeep rolled into view at the top of the slope and stopped. The engine cut. A door slammed. "Emma!" Miguel's voice carried down, sharp and furious. "What on earth are you doing down there?" She turned slowly, letting him see the whole picture. The fallen branch, the lioness pinned beneath it, the cubs pressed against Mara's belly, and Emma herself standing in the no-man's land between predator and scavenger. Miguel came down the slope faster than was strictly safe for a man his age. He had a rifle slung over one shoulder and a medical bag banging against his hip. His face was set hard, but his eyes, when they flicked to Mara, softened with something like grief. "Madre de Dios, she's worse than I expected." "I don't say, 'I told you.'" She just nodded. "We don't have much time," she said quietly. "She's dehydrated, trapped, and those hyenas are just waiting for us to leave." Miguel stared at her, jaw tight. "Emma, and you decided to stand between them and free food, without backup, without sedation. Emma, this is beyond reckless." "Maybe, but it's why she's still alive. They were ready to move in." He didn't argue, not about that. His gaze went back to Mara, taking in every detail with a surgeon's eye, the shallow rise of her ribs, the way her back leg lay twisted under the branch, the dullness of her gums. "I can trank her," he said, more to himself than to her. "Get fluids in, free the hip. The cubs, we can supplement with formula. It's possible." He exhaled. "But if she wakes up terrified, associates us with this pain, she might abandon them or come after any human she sees." Emma swallowed. This was the part she'd been turning over in her mind since the first cry echoing through the radio. "I don't want her to wake up to strangers and needles, not if we can help it. I want her to see us before the drugs, to understand, as much as a lion can, that we're not here to take her cubs or finish her off." He lifted a brow. "Understand, Emma, she is an apex predator, not a patient in a hospital." She met her eyes. "Then let's give her a different instinct to work with." He studied her a long moment. The anger faded, replaced with something more complicated. Worry, yes, but also a reluctant respect. "What are you asking?" he said. "Give me 30 minutes. Let me approach her awake, slow. Let her see me, hear me. If she accepts me near the cubs, you step in with the IV. If she doesn't," she let the unfinished thought hang between them, "then you do what you have to do from up there." Miguel glanced at the ridge, at the place where the hyena's eyes still glowed faintly. He chewed the inside of his cheek. 30 minutes, he repeated. "And if she charges before then?" "You tranquilize her," Emma said, "even if I'm in the way." His gaze snapped back to her. "That is not a joke." "I'm not joking." Silence stretched between them. Then finally he nodded once. "All right, 30 minutes. I'll be on the slope with the rifle and the kit. If she comes for you, I'll stop her." Emma's heartbeat picked up, loud in her ears. This was it, the thin edge between courage and stupidity, between doing nothing and doing something she might regret for the rest of her life. She turned back toward Mara. The first light of dawn was just beginning to soften the eastern sky, painting the rocks in a faint gray. She paced off the distance in her head. 30 meters. 20. 10. She took her first step. Behind her, she could feel Miguel's eyes on her back, and somewhere above, the watchful gaze of hyenas waiting to see which side would falter first. The air felt tight, every breath a deliberate choice. "Okay, Mara," she murmured under her breath. "It's your turn now." And she walked, one slow step at a time, into the lioness's circle.
Emma took her first step toward Mara, and the world seemed to narrow into a single, silent corridor between them. Every sound faded. The distant hyenas, the soft churring insects, even Miguel's cautious shifting of boots on gravel. All she heard was her own breathing, slow and controlled, the way she'd been trained when approaching large predators. But this wasn't training. This was a negotiation with death. She lowered herself onto one knee, then sat fully onto the warm dust. Legs crossed, hands visible, palms open. Her posture was deliberate, small, non-threatening, vulnerable, exactly the opposite of what instinct screamed she should be doing. Yet she knew predators understood posture better than any spoken language. "Mara," she whispered, her voice just loud enough to carry across the 7 meters left between them. "You're a good mother. You fought hard. Too hard." The lioness stirred, barely. Her head lifted an inch, then fell, then lifted again. Her breaths came in short, rasping pulls. Exhaustion dripped from every tremor of her muscles. But she was watching. That was something. Emma stayed perfectly still. She knew the rules. No sudden movement, no direct lean toward the cubs, no changes in silhouette. She let Mara study her shape, her scent, her intent. Behind her, Miguel whispered sharply from the ridge, "Emma, her claws, look at her paws." Emma didn't need to look. She already knew. Mara's claws were fully unsheathed, extended in a trembling curve against the sand. The lioness didn't have strength to rise, but instinct was alive and loud inside her. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're allowed to be afraid. I am too." She moved her right hand slowly toward her pack. Just 2 inches, no more. Mara reacted instantly. A rasping half-growl vibrated through her chest, a sound more pain than threat. Emma froze. "It's all right," she whispered. "I'm not grabbing anything dangerous." Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she withdrew a single object from the pack, a metal bowl. Empty, but clean, shining under the widening dawn light. She set it on the ground between them, not close enough to invade the den, not far enough to seem meaningless. Mara watched the bowl like it was alive. Emma lifted her canteen, tilted it. Water streamed into the bowl, thin and shimmering. The sound was gentle, familiar to every animal on this continent. Mara's ears twitched toward it, her nostrils flaring with instinct older than language. "She needs it," Emma whispered to Miguel, though she didn't take her eyes off the lioness. Then she nudged the bowl forward with the tips of her fingers, a tiny scrape of metal on dirt. Mara's claws flexed. Emma didn't move again. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then Mara did something that made Emma's chest tighten in disbelief. The lioness dragged one trembling paw forward, not to strike, not to swipe, to pull herself closer to the smell of water. Her movements were jerky, weak, uneven, but deliberate. Emma almost cried from the relief of it. "Good girl," she breathed. "Take it slow. It's yours." Mara lowered her head those last inches and touched her cracked tongue to the water. She couldn't lap properly at first. Her tongue moved awkwardly, stiff with dehydration.
but she drank. Drops spilled over the rim and onto her muzzle, darkening the dust. Behind her, she heard Miguel's sigh. Soft, amazed, disbelieving. Emma stayed still, steady, grounded. You're doing great. Keep going. You need this. They need you. As Mara drank, her body relaxed a fraction. Her breath shifted, not easier yet, but less frantic, less ragged. The cub sensed the change too. The smallest, the one Emma had feared would not last another hour, gave a faint squeak and nudged its tiny face against its mother's belly. Emma felt her heart twist. But the moment wasn't safe yet. A scraping sound echoed from the ridge. Emma didn't turn her head, didn't break the fragile line of trust forming between her and the lioness. "Miguel?" she whispered. "Hyenas," he murmured back. "3 have come down the slope again. They know she's weakened." Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. "We're out of time," Miguel added. His voice was steady, but strained. "If you're planning to try anything, it needs to happen now." Emma nodded slightly, still keeping her eyes on Mara. The lioness lifted her head from the bowl, panting softly. Water streaked her fur. She blinked once, slow, heavy-lidded, and her gaze drifted to Emma's hands. The message she saw in that look wasn't trust, not yet, but it wasn't fear. It was something in between, something that felt like a question. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "I'm going to reach for them." Her arms trembled with nerves as she slid forward an inch. Mara's claws extended again, reflexively, but there was hesitation now, confusion, awareness. Emma stretched her hand toward the smallest cub, brushing its fur with the tips of her fingers. The cub was warm, but frighteningly light, like lifting an empty glove. Its tiny chest fluttered beneath her touch. Mara's gaze sharpened. Her paw twitched toward Emma, weak, uncoordinated, but not to strike. More like a warning, a plea, a mother's last fragment of control. Emma met the lioness's fading eyes. "I know," she breathed. "You want to keep them safe. So do I." She lifted the cub gently, slowly, carefully. Mara didn't move, didn't growl, didn't attack, only watched. And in that fragile, impossible instant, one heartbeat balanced on instinct, motherhood, pain, and desperation, Emma felt the air shift, not with danger, with permission.
The cub in Emma's hands weighed almost nothing. Its tiny ribs fluttered like paper with each thin breath, its head lolling helplessly against her fingers. She held it close to her chest, careful not to frighten Mara, but the lioness was beyond reacting with speed now. What strength she had left went into watching Emma with an intensity that felt almost human. Mara's eyes tracked every inch of movement as Emma shifted the cub into the crook of her arm and reached into her pack with the other hand. She moved slowly, each motion deliberate, rehearsed in her mind before she dared perform it. "Easy," she whispered again, though the words were more for her own nerves. "You're doing fine, Mara. I'm just feeding your baby." She withdrew a small bottle, rubber-tipped, pre-filled with rehydration formula she always kept for orphaned wild dogs and the occasional dehydrated fawn. She'd never used one on a lion cub before. She wasn't sure if it would work, but she had to try. Miguel spoke from behind her, his voice tight. "2 hyenas are circling left. Another one is creeping closer on your right. They're waiting for you to slip." Emma didn't look back. "Keep your rifle ready and keep them scared. I can do 1. The other 4 are getting braver." 4. Emma's stomach knotted. Time was evaporating. She held the bottle near the cub's mouth and squeezed a drop of formula onto its lips. The cub twitched.
Its tongue fluttered weakly, then latched. Barely, but enough. "There you go," Emma breathed, the relief almost making her dizzy. "That's it. Come on, little one, drink." The cub suckled with faint, desperate movements. Each swallow felt like a victory pulled from the jaws of inevitability. Mara's ears flicked toward the sound, her baby feeding. Her cracked lips parted in a faint, rasping breath. Not agitation, not threat. Recognition. Emma risked glancing up. What she saw in Mara's face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. Exhaustion. Fear. Pain. But threaded through all of it, a question. Not, "Are you a threat?" but, "Are you helping them?" Emma nodded once, a tiny gesture meant only for the lioness. Mara's eyes softened. Just slightly. Just enough. The second cub gave a weak cry, nudging against its mother's unmoving flank. Emma's heart clenched. It needed feeding too, but she had only 2 hands, 1 bottle, and a predator who could still change her mind with the last of her strength. "I'm going to put this one down," Emma whispered, her voice shaking, as she eased the fed cub onto the softest patch of dirt she could find. Mara's claws flexed at the movement, instinct grasping for control, but the lioness did not strike. She watched, tense and trembling, as Emma lifted the second cub. This one was slightly stronger. It squirmed faintly in Emma's hands. Its dusty fur brushed her wrist. When she brought the bottle near its mouth, it latched faster than the first. Hunger drove it. "That's good," Emma murmured. "Stay with me. Don't give up." Behind her, Miguel hissed, "Emma, left side. Hyena, 10 yards." Emma didn't look. If she looked, fear might crack the fragile trust forming here. And trust, thin, trembling, absurd, was the only thing keeping her alive within swiping distance of a dying apex predator. "Miguel," she whispered, "drive them off. I can't break concentration." "I'm trying," he shot back. I heard him grab a stone and smash it against the rock wall. The loud crack echoed across the basin. A hyena yelped and scuttled back. But more laughter followed. Closer now. Impatient. Emma focused on the cub, feeding it slow, careful, making sure it could swallow. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Mara shifting. A tremor ran through the lioness's entire frame. With a monumental effort, she lifted her paw and placed it, shakily, deliberately, between Emma and the third cub. Emma froze. The message was unmistakable. Not that one. Not yet. Mara wasn't rejecting Emma. She was prioritizing. The smallest cub, the one Emma had fed first, needed the most immediate help. Mara's instinct was still working, even through agony. She knew which offspring were fading fastest. She knew where Emma's efforts were most needed. A mother, even dying, was still a mother. Emma felt emotion choke her throat. She swallowed hard, steadying her breathing. "Okay, we'll do it your way." Mara blinked once, slow, controlled. And then, unexpectedly, the lioness did something that made Emma forget how to breathe altogether. She lowered her massive head so close that her muzzle brushed the dust near Emma's knee. She exhaled a long, shaking breath, through pain, through fear, through instinct. Not submission, not trust, something deeper. A plea. A mother asking for help. Emma's vision blurred. She blinked the tears away, forcing her hands steady as she guided the bottle back to the cub's mouth. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. "I'm here, girl. I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Behind her, Miguel murmured something in Spanish, a prayer, a curse, or maybe just wonder. She didn't need to understand the words. Because right now, in this impossible dawn, a dying lioness had chosen not to kill her, had chosen not to protect her cubs with the last of her strength, had chosen in the smallest motion of her paw and the softest blink of her eyes to believe in her. Emma fed the second cub until its belly rounded slightly. Then she set it gently beside its sibling. She reached toward the third cub, and Mara let her. The first true crack in instinct had opened, and Emma stepped through it.
The third cub was stronger than Emma expected. When she lifted it, tiny claws caught in the fabric of her sleeve, as if even in weakness it refused to let go of life. Its eyes were still clouded blue, unfocused, but its mouth opened wide, searching blindly. When she brought the bottle close, it latched hard, sucking with desperate determination. "That's it," she murmured, her voice barely more than breath. "You hang on. Your mama's still fighting. So will we." Mara watched, her head turned as far as her stiff neck would allow. The lioness's breaths were ragged now, each one a labor. Her flank moved in shallow jerks, dust rising and falling with the rhythm. But there was a little more focus in her gaze, a little more awareness stiffening her ears. Behind Emma, Miguel's voice came low and tense. "Hyenas again. Closer. I can see 4, maybe 5. Their laughter floated down a moment later, ugly, eager, impatient. It was a sound Emma had come to hate more than any roar. "We're almost done," she whispered, not sure if she meant the feeding or this whole mad gamble. "Just a little longer." She switched the bottle to the other side, letting the cub nurse until its frantic sucking slowed. Its belly felt less hollow under her fingers, a small swell of hope under thin skin. Carefully, she set it back down beside its siblings, arranging their limp bodies so they touched, sharing warmth, sharing a heartbeat. That was when one of the hyenas finally gambled. It slid down from the rim of the basin, moving faster now, confidence rising. Its paws kicked small stones loose. They rattled down the slope. Another followed, then another, fanning out instinctively to flank. "Emma," Miguel called sharply. "Right side. You've got one coming in behind the rocks, 10 yards and closing." Emma turned just enough to see it, a gray-brown shape slipping around the far edge of the den, using the curve of stone as cover. Its eyes weren't on her. They were on the cubs. Time compressed. The air seemed to thicken. Emma snatched up her empty water bottle and took 3 quick strides toward the edge of the rock, trying to cut the hyena off. She raised her arm and hurled the bottle as hard as she could. It struck the ground in front of the animal, bouncing and rattling, startling it back a step. Her boot landed on loose gravel. The stone gave way. She slipped. The world tilted violently. Her shoulders slammed into the rock face, then her back. Then she was sliding sideways down the short slope, dust filling her mouth and nose. Pain flared along her spine as she hit bottom and rolled, her head snapping back against a small boulder. The breath flew out of her lungs. For a moment she couldn't move. The sky spun, light shimmered. Somewhere, very close, a low, broken roar tore through the air. Emma forced her eyes open. Mara was up. Not fully, not the strong, effortless rise of a healthy lioness, but up enough. Somehow, against the weight of the fallen branch, against the dehydration and muscle failure, the lioness had found something buried deep. She had hauled her chest off the ground, front legs braced wide, claws carving furrows in the dirt. And she was looking straight at Emma. From this angle, pinned half sitting against the rock with her legs twisted under her, Emma could see every detail. The foam at the edge of Mara's mouth, the blaze of pain in her eyes, the tremor in each muscle. For an instant, nothing else existed. 3 seconds. In the first heartbeat, Emma saw the lioness gather herself, muscles quivering, weight shifting just enough that every survival instinct in Emma screamed, "She's coming for you." And the second she heard the hyena snarl, felt its presence at the edge of her vision as it edged closer to the cubs while the mother's attention was on the human in front of her. In the third, Mara made her choice. She lunged. Emma didn't close her eyes. Couldn't. She watched the lioness surge forward with a broken, desperate grace, coughing up a roar that sounded like it had been torn from her very bones. Dust exploded under Mara's paws as she passed so close, Emma felt the rush of air, the heat of her body, the brush of her fur against Emma's shoulder. Not at her, over her. Mara landed between Emma and the hyena, body low, teeth bared in a snarl that had nothing left to give but heart. She swiped with a paw that should have been too weak to lift. The hyena yelped, stumbling back, a gash opening along its muzzle. Two more hung just out of reach, pacing, suddenly less sure. From the ridge, the sharp pfft of compressed air cut through the chaos. Miguel's dart hit home in Mara's shoulder. The lioness flinched, her body jerking. For a terrible moment, I thought they'd been too late, that the dart would drop her before she finished scaring off the scavengers. But Mara rallied for one last surge. She lunged again, jaws snapping inches from another hyena's face. The animal spun away, tail clamped tight to its body, the others flowing with it, back up the slope, beyond safe range. Only then did Mara's strength fail. Her front legs buckled. She crashed to the ground, chest heaving, head rolling sideways until her cheek pressed into the dust, not far from Emma's boot. Emma scrambled upright as best she could, her back screaming, and crawled to the lioness's side. Mara's eyes were half open, pupils dilated. The tranquilizer was starting to work, dragging her to oblivion. But in those fading seconds, she slid her gaze toward Emma. Not at the dart, not at the hyenas retreating. At her. "You did it," Emma whispered, her voice shaking. "You chose them." Her own hands trembled as she reached for the cubs. One by one, she gathered them up and carried them under the sliver of shade at Mara's neck, where her fading warmth still radiated. The smallest cub lay floppy and silent in her hands. Too silent. No, 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 Emma breathed, lowering it gently and pressing two fingers against its tiny chest. There, faint, fluttering, but there. She cupped its head in her palm and cleared a bit of dust from its nose and mouth with a corner of her sleeve. "Come on, little one. You don't get to stop now, not after what she just did." She rubbed its ribs gently with her thumb, small circular motions, like she'd been taught for pups and fawns. Nothing. She rubbed harder. The cub's body jolted once, then sagged. For a heartbeat, the basin felt utterly still. Then, with a tiny shudder, the cub drew in a breath so thin it was barely a thread of sound. Emma laughed once, a broken, disbelieving sound, and kept rubbing, kept talking, anchoring that fragile life to the world with the only thing she had left, her hands and her voice. Behind her, Miguel slid down the slope with his medical pack, breathing hard. "Is she down?" Emma called, not taking her eyes off the cub. "Out cold," he answered, already kneeling at Mara's foreleg, fingers searching for a vein. "But she's still with us, for now." "You?" Emma looked at the lioness, at the body that had chosen to spend its last reserves not on attack, not on flight, but on leaping past a human to stand between her babies and death. "I'm here," Emma said softly, "thanks to her." The sun was fully up now, light spilling into the basin, washing the dust in gold. Hyenas lurked at the rim, frustrated and watchful, but they stayed back. For the first time since this began, the scales had tipped, not toward death, not yet, but away from certainty. All because a dying lioness, in 3 heartbeats, had chosen mercy over fear.
Miguel worked with mechanical precision as he threaded the IV line into Mara's foreleg, but Emma could see the sweat rolling down the side of his face, dripping from his jaw. It wasn't the heat, though the morning was already punishing. It was the weight of what had just happened, the impossible choice they had witnessed, and the terrifying knowledge that survival was still far from guaranteed. "She's holding pressure," Miguel muttered, adjusting the fluid bag. "Barely, but she's holding." Emma nodded, clutching the smallest cub to her chest to keep it warm. Its breaths were shallow but steady now, tiny ribs fluttering against her palm. "Stay with your mama," she whispered. "She fought for you. Now you fight too." The other two cubs were curled against Mara's neck, sleeping the way exhausted newborns do, without sound, without worry, without knowing how close they had come to never waking up again. Emma checked them one by one, feeling their bellies, brushing the dust from their faces. The hyenas were still watching. Their silhouettes lined the rim of the basin, pacing, restless. They were patient creatures. Scavengers survived by waiting for the moment others fell. And in their small, calculating minds, Mara was already half dead, a collapsing meal if they could just outlast the humans. Miguel stood and dusted his hands. "Fluids will help, but she's in critical shape. We'll need at least 2 more rounds before she stabilizes." He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Torres. I need a mobile crate and a transport crew, fast." Static answered at first, then a voice crackled through. "Copy, Torres. Crew is 60 minutes out." Emma glanced toward the rising sun. The basin was heating too fast. Mara couldn't survive another hour under direct light. "We need shade," she said. "Real shade." Miguel scanned the barren ground, his expression tightening. "There's nothing here strong enough." "Then we make it." She shrugged off her pack, unbuckled her own jacket, and draped it over Mara's head and neck to shield her face from the light. It was a small thing, but the lioness's labored breathing eased by the slightest fraction. Emma unrolled a spare emergency tarp from her pack, wedged its corner under a rock, and angled it to cast a narrow shadow over Mara's torso. Miguel followed her lead, using his own jacket and a field cloth. Piece by piece, patch by patch, they carved out a crude shelter that would buy them precious minutes. Minutes Mara desperately needed. Emma settled beside the lioness again. She rested one hand lightly on Mara's shoulder, not pressing, not claiming, just offering presence. The lioness's skin twitched under her touch, but she did not pull away. "You fought so hard," she whispered. "You don't quit now." The air trembled with heat. Dust shimmered in slow, lazy spirals. The only sounds were the steady drip of fluid through the line and the faint, fragile breaths of the cubs. Then, Miguel stiffened. "You hear that?" he asked. Emma listened. A low, rolling growl drifted across the basin, not hyena laughter, not scavenger chatter. This was deeper, resonant, territorial. A lion. A male. Emma's blood ran cold. "It's her mate." "Maybe," Miguel said. "Maybe not." In the distance, loose stones rattled down the far slope. Emma tightened her grip on the smallest cub. If a male approached the den and found Mara incapacitated and strange smells all around, his instinct might drive him to eliminate the cubs and claim the territory for himself. She rose to her knees, searching the ridgeline. Nothing. The growl came again, closer this time. Mara reacted instantly, her eyes snapped open, her ears twitching weakly. She tried to lift her head, but managed only a half rise before collapsing back onto the dust. Panic flickered in her gaze, not for herself, but for the cubs nestled against her. Emma dropped beside her again. "Easy, easy, girl. We've got them." Miguel raised his rifle. "If it's a rogue male, we're in trouble. I have 1 dart left." "1 dart won't stop a healthy male," Emma said softly. He nodded. "I know." They waited. For seconds. For minutes. For a decision that wasn't theirs to make. Then, through the swirling heat, a shape emerged. A large male lion, mane wind-tangled and eyes sharp. He paused at the top of the ridge, head raised as he sniffed the air. Then he descended with powerful strides, dust puffing under his paws. Emma felt her pulse hammer. "Don't move," Miguel murmured. "I'm not breathing, Emma whispered back. The lion stopped 15 yards away, tail flicking. His eyes moved from Emma to Miguel, then to Mara, and his entire posture shifted. His ears flattened. A rumble vibrated through his chest. But it wasn't aggression. It was recognition. "He knows her," Emma breathed. "He's her pride male." The lion stepped toward Mara, slowly now, lowering his head as he reached her. He nudged her flank with his muzzle, a soft, questioning grunt rumbling from his throat. Mara weakly turned her face toward him. The cubs stirred, their tiny mews drawing the male's attention. Emma held her breath. The male bent his massive head and inhaled deeply near the cubs, his muscles tensed for a heartbeat, ancient instinct weighing life and lineage. Then he relaxed. He brushed his cheek along Mara's, a gesture of reassurance. Then he lay down beside her, positioning his body between the den and the hyenas still circling above. Miguel exhaled a shaking breath. "Well, we just got a guard." Emma didn't realize she was crying until she felt tears fall onto the cubs in her lap. Relief washed through her, warm, overwhelming, impossible. "Then let him stand watch," she whispered, stroking Mara's neck. "You did your part. Now let your family do theirs." The basin was still dangerous. The sun was rising. The rescue crew was still an hour away. But for the first time since dawn, Emma believed Mara might live through this. Not because of humans, not because of luck, but because even a dying lioness was not alone.
For the next 40 minutes, time moved strangely in the basin. Too fast when Emma's eyes flicked to the scorching sun, too slow when she watched the rise and fall of Mara's chest. Miguel stayed beside the IV line, checking the drip, adjusting the flow, never letting his guard down. The male lion, whom Emma silently named Rowan for the deep rust-colored streak in his mane, remained stationed between them and the hyenas, his massive body a living barrier. Every few minutes, Rowan released a low, thunderous growl that rolled across the heat-struck ground. The hyenas responded with their ugly yips, but stayed back, unwilling to challenge a healthy pride male. It gave Mara just enough of a bubble to breathe, to sink deeper into the drug-induced rest her body desperately needed. But the sun's heat was becoming unbearable. Emma shifted the emergency tarp again, widening the shaded corner. The cubs stirred restlessly, their tiny bodies growing too warm even under the makeshift canopy. She sprinkled a few drops of water on their paws and ears, careful not to chill them, careful not to shock their fragile systems. They settled again, pressed together like three tiny sparks, waiting for wind. "How long?" she asked Miguel. "Transport crew says 20 minutes out." His voice was hopeful, but the worry lines etched in his forehead told a different story. "She's fading in and out, heart rate's unstable. We're racing the clock." Emma swallowed hard. Mara had already beaten impossible odds, choosing trust over instinct, choosing life over surrender. But one act of courage didn't guarantee survival. Nature rarely rewarded effort. It simply was. A soft rumble made Emma turn. Rowan had shifted closer. He lowered his enormous head until it rested lightly across Mara's foreleg. His eyes half closed, his breath warm and steady. A presence meant to anchor her, just as Emma had tried to. "He knows she's in trouble," Emma murmured. Miguel nodded. "Pride males will defend territory, will challenge rivals, will kill cubs that aren't theirs. But comfort, that's rare." Emma reached out, brushing her fingertips over Mara's dusty shoulder. "Maybe rarity doesn't matter today." A faint tremor rippled through the ground. Emma frowned. "Feel that?" Before Miguel could answer, the tremor deepened. No longer a vibration, but a distant, rolling thud. The sky, blistering blue moments before, now held a bruised dark smear along the horizon. Clouds. Big ones. Heavy ones. Miguel looked up sharply. Well, I'll be damned. That's a storm front. The first breath of wind swept through the basin, cool and sharp, carrying the earthy scent of distant rain. Rowan lifted his head, nostrils flaring. Even the hyenas stopped pacing, uneasy with the shift in the air. Emma's chest tightened. Rain meant hope. Rain meant renewal. Rain meant life. Another rumble echoed, thunder this time, deep and promising. Then a single drop of water fell. It landed on the back of Emma's hand, cool, startling, real. She looked up just in time to see the sky split open. The rain came hard and sudden, a curtain of silver pouring over the basin. It hammered against the tarp and jackets, sending up tiny explosions of dust turned mud. The hyenas shrieked and scattered, scrambling for higher ground. Rowan rose, shaking water from his mane before repositioning protectively over the cubs, shielding them from the downpour with his massive frame. Emma laughed, a broken, breathless sound. You've got to be kidding me! After all this, we get rain now? Miguel wiped his soaked brow and grinned. I'll take every drop. Emma ducked under the tarp to check the cubs. Their fur was damp, but warm against Rowan's chest. Mara stirred, blinking slowly as rain pooled on her muzzle. Emma gently shielded her face with the corner of her jacket. Mara, she whispered, brushing rain-soaked fur from the lioness's eyes. Look at that. The world's giving you another chance. For a moment, just one, Mara focused. Truly focused. Her pupils narrowed, her ears twitched, her breathing deepened ever so slightly, as if her lungs had remembered how to pull air without pain. She's responding, Miguel said, leaning in. The fluids are kicking in, her heart rate stabilizing. Emma exhaled, relief sweeping through her in a warm, dizzy wave. The rain fell harder. It splashed into the basin with a sound like applause, wild, primal applause, for a lioness who had refused to give up. A crackle of static snapped through Miguel's radio. Transport team arriving. We're 1 minute out. Emma let her eyes close for the briefest second. Thank God. The hum of an engine echoed across the basin as the rescue vehicle crested the ridge. 2 rangers jumped out, wrestling a reinforced crate down the slope. Rowan stood tall, growling low, but Emma held up her hand. It's okay, big guy. We're helping her. Rowan watched her, truly watched her, then stepped aside just enough for the rangers to reach Mara. The crate was positioned carefully. Emma and Miguel lifted Mara's head while the rangers secured harnesses around her body. Each movement was slow, deliberate, every second in the rain making the ground softer, slicker, more dangerous. When they finally hoisted her up, Mara's paw brushed Emma's arm. Not a swipe, not a reflex. A touch. Emma froze. Mara's eyes were half open, weak, drugged, fighting, but she held Emma's gaze long enough to send a message without a single sound. You didn't hurt them. You saved them. I know. Emma's throat tightened so hard she couldn't speak. Rain blurred everything, the edges of the basin, the distant shapes of trees, even Rowan's silhouette as he stepped closer, watching every movement with regal intensity. The rangers secured Mara in the transport crate. The cubs were placed gently beside her, wrapped in warm cloth. Rowan passed once around the vehicle, touching the crate with his nose before stepping back, satisfied, a silent blessing. The engine revved. Mara's journey toward recovery had begun,
Emma stood in the rain, drenched and trembling, not from cold, but from everything that had happened in the span of a single impossible morning. Miguel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it." Emma shook her head slowly. "No, she did. She made the choice. I just followed it." Above them, thunder rolled one last time, louder, deeper, almost triumphant. The drought had broken. The lioness had survived the dawn. And the story was far from over.
2 years passed, though sometimes Emma felt as if they had slipped by in a single, continuous breath. One long exhale of relief after everything that happened in that sun-scorched basin. Mara recovered fully at the reserve's wildlife center, and once her strength returned and her milk flowed easily, she and her cubs were released back into their territory. Emma had watched them disappear into the tall grass with a bittersweet ache, knowing that wild meant gone, and that's what was right. Mara thrived. All 3 cubs survived their first year, then their second, growing into sleek, golden adolescents with the confidence that came from a healthy mother. The drought ended that same season, and the plains of Red Valley transformed from cracked earth to an ocean of green. The rivers filled, herds returned, predators stalked again with purpose instead of desperation. But even as the land healed, Emma carried one unanswered question. Did Mara remember her? Most wild animals didn't hold on to such things. Survival erased sentiment. Instinct rewrote memory. And Emma had accepted that, mostly. But every now and then, when she patrolled the southern sector, she would find herself scanning the horizon, wondering if somewhere behind the golden grass, a pair of amber eyes watched her back. It wasn't hope, not exactly. More like a quiet wondering that never faded. On a warm afternoon in late summer, Emma drove toward a newly installed water monitor near the eastern ridge. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of fresh grass and blooming acacia. She hummed softly along with the radio, tapping the steering wheel with the rhythm. Life at Red Valley had returned to normal, and for the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel like a fragile thing. She parked atop a small rise overlooking several acres of tall grass. The sun slanted low, painting the entire landscape gold. Emma lifted her binoculars, out of habit, just a casual scan. Halfway across the plains, movement caught her eye. 3 lions, 1 large, 2 smaller, were stalking a small group of springbok. The adult female led the approach, fluid, powerful, every muscle sculpted with wild purpose. Emma froze. The lioness lifted her head. Even from this distance, even through heat haze, Emma knew. "Mara," she whispered, breath catching. The cubs, now nearly grown, flanked her gracefully. They were larger than Emma remembered, their spots faded, their bodies filled out with maturity. But the way they moved mirrored Mara's every step, like echoes of the mother who'd raised them against all odds. Emma lowered the binoculars. Her hands shook. Her pulse hammered like she was back in that scorching basin again, kneeling beside a lioness who should have killed her. A sudden breeze rustled through the valley, bending the grass in long waves. Mara stopped mid-stalk. Her head lifted. Her ears swiveled. Her body stilled. Then, impossibly, she turned, directly toward Emma. 400 yards away, far beyond any logical distance for recognition, Mara stared across the golden stretch of land. The wind carried Emma's scent, faint but real, just enough to brush past old synapses, old memories, old instincts. Emma didn't move, didn't blink. The lioness began walking toward her, not with the posture of a hunt, not with the tense steps of alarm, but with the slow, deliberate gait of an animal approaching something known. The 2 younger lions followed at first, confused, then stopped when Mara released a soft, low call, not a warning, not a threat, a reassurance, a signal to stay.
Emma stepped out of her Jeep, her boots sinking slightly into the warm soil. She didn't wave, didn't call out. She simply stood with her hands at her sides, heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. Mara closed the distance to 50 yards, then 30, then 20. Emma exhaled shakily. "It's really you." The lioness stopped 10 yards away, just as she had so long ago when Emma first approached her near death. Only this time, Mara stood tall, her body full and strong, her amber eyes clear with intelligence and memory. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Mara did something Emma would replay for the rest of her life. She lowered her head, slowly, intentionally, a gesture of familiarity, gratitude, acknowledgement, whatever word humans could assign to something that lived beyond language. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She lifted one trembling hand an inch off her thigh, not reaching out, not crossing the invisible boundary between human and wild, just offering presence. "You remember," she whispered. "After all this time, you still remember." Mara blinked once, slow, deliberate, then turned back toward her nearly grown cubs. She gave a soft grunt, calling them, and the two lions bounded forward. Before following them, Mara paused once more, her silhouette outlined by the sinking sun. It wasn't a goodbye, not this time. It was a recognition, a promise that the past had mattered, a reminder that even the wildest hearts hold threads of memory that never fully break. Emma watched as Mara and her nearly grown cubs disappeared into the tall, shimmering grass, swallowed once more by the life they belonged to. Only when they were gone did she whisper to the empty plains, "You chose trust, and it saved us all." The winds swept through the valley, carrying the scent of rain and grass, warm, alive, endless. A lioness had lived, her cubs had thrived, and against every rule of nature, every wall between species, she had remembered. Emma stood for a long time before climbing back into her Jeep, a quiet smile rising on her face. Some stories end, some change us, and some, like the bond between a dying lioness and the human she chose not to kill, echo for a lifetime.